hear more changing cards. We're going to hear more.
Climate change is going to affect health in a number of different ways, and at least in part it depends on where in the world you live. If you live in somewhere like Bangladesh, then we know that coastal flooding will get worse because the seas will rise, and in fact there is some evidence that that's already happening. So clearly in those countries we're talking about flooding, about loss of habitat and also loss of places to grow food. But even in the UK we may get more flooding during the summer months, and that again the disruption on people's homes. Heating of the environment could lead to vector-borne diseases, the things that you get from being bitten by a mosquito or a tick or something else, being more commonly seen in countries which have been too cool in the past. So you could, for example, postulate in the future seeing malaria endemic in Europe. I don't think that doctors are more sceptical about climate change than any other professions. I think that doctors, like other professions, and particularly about the scientists, want to see what the evidence is. Most of the doctors we talk to believe that climate change is happening, and they may argue with some of the science, but they believe that generally there has been damage, environmental damage from this, and that it is almost certainly getting worse and going to get worse. So what they're interested in is what can we do to reduce that, and in particular to reduce the implications for human health. We produced a report about 2 years ago on climate change, on what doctors could do and the impact of this. We're just finalising a second report which updates that and looks in particular at individual actions. So there are things that doctors can do as citizens, there are things that doctors can do as doctors, and particularly the health service is a major user of, say, plastics and of energy. And what can we do as doctors within the health service to help the health service reduce its carbon footprint? And then secondly, how can doctors make sure that health and climate change gets onto the climate change agenda? Because it might persuade countries reluctant to invest that they need to invest in change, or they're going to have to pick up the health consequence bill. There's a lot of motions come in on climate change, and what's happened is the agenda committee's put these together into a 5-part motion to try to get us to address all the different issues. So for example, it looks at issues of the NHS and its place as a user of plastics and so on. It looks at what we can do, each individual as doctors. It asks the BMA to do more, so we will of course be reporting on how much we've done. A lot of people don't know there's a second report almost ready. And also to get getting health on the climate agenda. I think that's a really big thing. Talking to friends at World Health Organization, they were really quite shocked by how little emphasis there is on health in this when you look at the big climate change conferences. And certainly talking to ministers in the last government, they were equally convinced that we need to get the health message across, because it will help them to convince other governments to invest in reducing climate change. The level of awareness amongst doctors will be very variable, as it is with the population. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't know there is something called climate change. Some will be very knowledgeable, will have really looked at the scientific evidence. Others will be less knowledgeable. But I think that doctors are particularly increasingly aware of the health impacts and of the health service impacts, the two very different areas, and are interested to see what we can do, what we can learn from other people's experience to actually make a difference. And a lot of doctors, for example GPs looking at their own premises, are saying, how can we make them greener? How can we become part of the solution and not the problem? As individuals we can make small differences because we can demonstrate that we're prepared to, for example, walk more, cycle more, use our cars less, and that has a small impact, but if everybody does it, it's a big impact. The other thing, which is a very good news story in climate change, is that if we all used active transport, walked or cycled more instead of using our cars, then we would be healthier. We'd save money and we'd contribute to lowering the damage to the environment. Now, isn't that nice? You get 3 benefits for 1 action. Well, in clinical practice, I think, of course, it's all about, predominantly about looking at the impact of plastics and of disposables and so on. And I think a lot of doctors are now getting increasingly interested in how can we actually recycle things better, reuse things safely. And we have to learn from the evidence on how we can get better at using things safely. Again, there's a huge advantage to the NHS at a time where cash is going to become increasingly restricted. Are there ways of not only helping to save the planet, but actually helping to save the NHS money? That would be, again, a double benefit. well, I personally walk. I don't cycle because I fall off my bike if I try to cycle, but I walk a great deal because I think that's important. And like everybody else, I recycle everything that I possibly can. I think all of those things, those little actions, make a difference. And think carefully about the use of packaging and all the rest of the things, the little steps that we all take individually. I don't feel any frustration at work because the BMA is actually very good at recycling. We have more recycling bins, bags, boxes and everything else, and people are very enthusiastic. I happen to live in a borough which is pretty good about recycling, but people who live in boroughs which are less good in London bring stuff into the office to recycle, and that's actually quite a positive thing. That I think a lot of people are finding ways to take things that can be recycled to places when they're going there anyway. And that again is back to citizen empowerment and citizen action, that we're all doing all these little things in the hope that it makes a difference. The frustration is predominantly that we don't yet know as citizens what is recycled. You know, you put all your paper in different places and your glass and your plastics and so on. But do we all know whether our local councils actually recycle it, or is it just junked in a different way? And that, I think, is one of the big things that we should be demanding of local government, that we know more about what they do.